with a financial crisis, a pandemic, and an energy shock caused by war in Europe. Yet, despite the most challenging economic headwinds in modern history, under Conservative governments since 2010, growth has been higher than every large European economy. Unemployment has halved, absolute poverty has gone down, and there are 800 more people in jobs for every single day that we've been in office. Of course, interest rates remain high as we bring down inflation. But because of the progress we've made, because we are delivering the Prime Minister's economic priorities, we can now help families not just with temporary cost of living support, but with permanent cuts in taxation. We do this to give much needed help in challenging times, but also because Conservatives know lower taxes mean higher growth. And higher growth means more opportunity, more prosperity, and more funding for our precious public services. But if we want that growth...
What? The Chancellor has hardly said anything. Order! You can't get excited yet. Now, other people want to hear what the Chancellor has to say, and it's natural. So, we'll have a bit of good behaviour, please. Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we want that growth to lead to higher wages and higher living standards for every family in every corner of the country, it cannot come from unlimited migration. It can only come by building a high-wage, high-skill economy, not just higher GDP, but higher GDP per head. And that is the difference with the party opposite. Their plans destroy jobs, reduce opportunities, and risk family finances with spending that pushes up taxes. Instead of going back to square one, the policies I announced today mean more investment, more jobs, better public services and lower taxes in a budget for long-term growth. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I start with the updated forecast from the OBR, for which I thank Richard Hughes and his team. First, inflation. When the Prime Minister and I came to office, it was 11%. The latest figures show... I know the party opposite struck...
No, this is not amusing anymore. We need to hear what the Chancellor has to say. I can tell who's making the noise, and you simply won't get a chance to speak later. So that's the end of it. Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister and I came to office, inflation was 11%, but the latest figures show it is now 4%, more than meeting our pledge to halve it last year. And today's forecasts from the OBR show it falling below the 2% target in just a few months' time, nearly a whole year earlier than forecast in the autumn statement. That didn't happen by accident. Whatever the pressures and whatever the politics, a Conservative government working with the Bank of England will always put sound money first. But we also understand that tackling inflation, while necessary, is painful. It means higher interest rates and a period of lower growth. So we've given the average household £3,400 in cost of living support over the last 2 years. Doing so makes economic as well as moral sense. The OBR predicted real household disposable income per person would fall by 2% in the last year. Instead, after this support, it is on track to rise by 0.8%. And today I take further steps to help families with cost of living pressures starting with measures to help the poorest families. We've already abolished higher charges for electricity paid by those on prepayment meters, increased the local housing allowance, and raised benefits by double expected inflation. Today I focus on those falling into debt. Nearly 1 million households on universal credit take out budgeting advance loans to pay for more expensive emergencies like boiler repairs or help getting a job. To help make such loans more affordable, I've today decided to increase the repayment period for new loans from 12 months to 24 months. For some people, I thought they cared about people on the lowest income. But trust the Labour Party not to want to hear about debt. For some people, the best way to resolve debt is through a debt relief order. But getting one costs £90, which can deter the very people who need them the most. So having listened carefully to representations from citizens' advice, I today relieve pressure on around 40,000 families every year by abolishing the £90 charge completely. Next, the Household Support Fund. It was set up on a temporary basis and due to conclude at the end of this month. Having listened carefully to representations from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Trussell Trust, and honourable members from East Ham, Colchester, Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, and Suffolk Coastal, amongst others, I've decided that with the battle against inflation still not over, now is not the time to stop the targeted help it offers. We will therefore continue it at current levels for another 6 months. Next, I turn to a measure that will help businesses and households more broadly. In the autumn statement, I froze alcohol duty until August of this year. Without any action today, it would have been due to rise by 3%. But I've listened carefully to my right honourable friends from Altrincham and Sale West, the Vale of Glamorgan, and my right honourable friend from Murray, who is a formidable champion of the Scottish whisky industry. I also listened to Councillor John Tonks from Ash, a strong supporter of the wonderful Admiral pub, who pointed out the pressures facing the industry. So today I've decided to extend the alcohol duty freeze until February 2025. This benefits 38,000 pubs across the UK, and on top of the £13,000 saving a typical pub will get from the 75% business rates discount I announced in the autumn. We value our hospitality industry and are backing the great British pub. Another cost that families and businesses worry about is fuel. Now, the Shadow Chancellor complained about the freeze on fuel duty, and Labour has opposed it at every opportunity. The Labour Mayor of London wants to punish motorists even more with his ULEZ plans, but lots of families and sole traders depend on their car. If I did nothing, fuel duty would increase by 13% this month. So instead, I've listened to my right honourable friends for Stoke-on-Trent North, Dudley North, Witham and others, as well as the Sun newspaper's Keep It Down campaign. I have, as a result, decided to maintain the 5p cut and freeze fuel duty for another 12 months. This will save the average car driver £50 next year and bring total savings since the 5p cut was introduced to around £250. Taken together with the alcohol duty freeze, this decision also reduces headline inflation by 0.2 percentage points in 24/5, allowing us to make faster progress towards the Bank of England's 2% target. Madam Deputy Speaker, there can be no solid growth without solid finances. An economy based on sound money does not pass its bills to the next generation. When it comes to borrowing, some believe there is a trade-off between compassion and fiscal responsibility. They are wrong. It is only because we responsibly reduced the deficit by 80% between 2010 and 2019 that we could provide £370 billion to help businesses and families in the pandemic. The party opposite opposed our plans to reduce the deficit every single step of the way. But in fairness, they were consistent. The Lib Dems supported controlling spending in coalition, but now say they would prop up a party that will turn on the spending taps. It's the difference between no plan and no principles. And I'm delighted the right honourable gentleman from the Lib Dems was here to hear it for once. Today, we say something different. There is nothing compassionate about running out of money. With the pandemic behind us, we must once again be responsible and build up our resilience to future shocks. That means bringing down borrowing so we can start to reduce our debt. And today's figures confirm that is happening. Ahead of my first autumn statement in 22, the OBR forecast headline debt would rise to above 100% of GDP. Today, they will say it will fall in every year to just 94% by 28-29. Underlying debt, which excludes Bank of England debt, will be 91.7% in 24-5, according to the OBR, then 92.8%, 93.2%, 93.2% before falling to 92.9% in 28-29, with final year headroom against debt falling of £8.9 billion. Our underlying debt is therefore on track to fall as a share of GDP, meeting our fiscal rule. And we continue to have the second lowest level of government debt in the G7, lower than Japan, France or the United States. We also meet our second fiscal rule for public sector borrowing to be below 3% of GDP 3 years early. Borrowing falls from 4.2% of GDP in 23-4 to 3.1%, 2.7%, 2.3%, 1.6% and 1.2% in 2028-29. By the end of the forecast, borrowing is at its lowest level of GDP since 2001. None of that, of course, would be possible if Labour implemented their pledge to decarbonise the grid 5 years early by 2030. By their own calculations, that costs £28 billion a year to do. But last month, after flip-flopping for months, they said they're not going to spend the £28 billion after all, but somehow they'll meet their pledge. Somehow, Madam Deputy Speaker, can only mean one thing: tax rises on working families. Same old Labour. Today, in contrast, a Conservative government brings down taxes with borrowing broadly unchanged. In fact, borrowing is slightly lower than the autumn statement. And the fact that we are bringing borrowing down is something of particular importance to one very special person. Sir Robert Stamen is the outgoing Chief Executive of the Government's Debt Management Office. And after 20 years of exceptional public service, he is in the gallery. Thank you, Sir Robert. I now turn to growth. Just after I became Chancellor, the OBR expected GDP to fall by 1.4% in the following year. In fact, it grew, albeit slowly. Now the OBR expects the economy to grow by 0.8% this year and 1.9% next year, 0.5% higher than their autumn forecast. After that, growth rises to 2.2%, 1.8% and 1.7% in 2028. Since 2010, they don't want to hear this, but these are the facts. Since 2010, we have grown faster than Germany, France or Italy, the three largest European economies. And according to the IMF, we will continue to grow faster than all three of them in the 5 years ahead. Surveys by Lloyds and Deloitte show business confidence is returning. In other words, because we have turned the corner on inflation, we will soon turn the corner on growth. And today's OBR forecasts also show that we have made good progress on the Prime Minister's 3 economic priorities. Compared to when the 3 pledges were made, inflation has halved, debt is falling in line with our fiscal rules, and growth is fully 1.5 percentage points higher than predicted. And as growth returns, they don't have a growth plan, so they might as well listen to ours. As growth returns, our plan is for economic growth not sustained through migration, but one that raises wages and living standards for families. Not just higher GDP, but higher GDP per head, and that means sticking to our plan with a budget for long-term growth, more investment, more jobs, better public services and lower taxes. And I start with investment. Economists say that stimulating investment is the most effective way to raise productivity and therefore wages and living standards. Since 2010, we've been doing just that. Business, well, you might want to listen to what I'm about to say because business investment has risen from an average of 9.3% of GDP under Labour to 9.9% under the Conservatives. And this year it will be 10.6% of GDP. That is £30 billion more business investment than if it had continued at Labour levels. And it's still going up. In the short period since the autumn statement, Nissan have announced they'll build 2 new electric car models in the UK. Microsoft and Google have announced data centres worth over £3 billion. Thanks to my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, the Global Investment Summit unlocked £30 billion of investment. In fact, since 2010, greenfield foreign direct investment has been higher than anywhere else in Europe. And for the last 3 years, we have been the 3rd highest in the world after the United States and China. And we're not stopping there. In the autumn statement, I announced we would introduce permanent full expensing, a £10 billion tax cut for businesses that gives the UK the most attractive investment tax regime of any large European or G7 country. It was welcomed by over 200 business leaders, with the CBI saying it was a game changer and the single most transformational thing we could do to fire up the British economy. And today I take further steps to boost investment. Having listened to calls from the CBI, Make UK and the BCC, we'll shortly publish draft legislation for full expensing to apply to leased assets, a change I intend to bring in as soon as it's affordable. We'll also help small businesses, something close to my own heart, as well as the business rate support and work on prompt payments I announced in the autumn. I'll provide £200 million of funding to extend the recovery loan scheme as it transitions to the growth guarantee scheme, helping 11,000 SMEs access the finance they need. And following representations from the Federation of Small Business, as well as honourable members for Loughborough, Southend West and Rother Valley, I will reduce the administrative and financial impact of VAT by increasing the VAT registration threshold from £85,000 to £90,000 from April the 1st, the first increase in 7 years. That will bring tens of thousands of businesses out of paying VAT altogether and encourage many more to invest and grow. I now move to measures to address historic underinvestment in our nations and regions. Since we started levelling up in 2019, 2/3 of all new salaried jobs have been created outside London and the South East. We've announced 13 investment zones and 12 free ports, which continue to attract investment, including recently, thanks to the efforts of Mayor Ben Houchen from the Numa Group, who are investing £15 million into the Tees Valley investment zone. Today, working with the Levelling Up Secretary, I devolve further power to local leaders who are best placed to promote growth in their areas. I can announce the North East Trailblazer devolution deal, providing a package of support for the region potentially worth over £100 million. I'll devolve powers to Buckinghamshire, Warwickshire, and to the most beautiful county in England, Surrey. I see the Leader of the Opposition smiling because, like me, he is a Surrey boy. I know he's been taking advice from Lord Mandelson, who yesterday rather uncharitably said he needed to shed a few pounds. Ordinary families will shed more than a few pounds if that lot get in. Today, if he wants to join me on my marathon training, he's most welcome as well. Today, we continue to spread opportunity throughout the country by allocating £100 million of levelling up funding to areas including High Peak, Dundee, Conway, Erewash, Redditch and Coventry to support cultural projects in these communities, alongside support for capital projects across the country, including in Bingley. We are expanding the long-term plan for towns to 20 new places, including Darlington, home of the Treasury's fantastic Darlington Economic Campus, Coleraine, Peterhead, Runcorn, Harlow, Eastbourne, Arbroath and Rhyl, providing each with £20 million of funding to invest in community regeneration over the next decade. We'll provide £15 million in new funding to the West Midlands Combined Authority to support culture, heritage and investment projects on the recommendation of our go-getting Mayor Andy Street. And we'll allocate £5 million to renovate hundreds of local village halls across England so they can remain at the heart of their communities. And because this is a Conservative and Unionist government, we'll also set aside funding to support the Saxavord Spaceport in Shetland, an agri-food launchpad in mid-Wales, and funding to support Northern Ireland's businesses to expand global trade and investment opportunities. As a result of the decisions we take today, the Scottish Government will receive nearly £300 million in Barnet consequentials, with nearly £170 million for the Welsh Government and £100 million for the Northern Ireland Executive. I do appreciate that a tax-cutting budget is very uncomfortable for the biggest tax risers in the United Kingdom. We also want to level up opportunity across the generations, including building more houses for young people, and we're on track to deliver over 1 million homes in this Parliament. Last week, the Levelling Up Secretary allocated £188 million to support projects in Sheffield, Blackpool and Liverpool, and today I go further, allocating £242 million of investments in Barking Riverside and Canary Wharf, which together will build nearly 8,000 houses, as well as transforming Canary Wharf into a new hub for life science companies. We're launching a new £20 million community-led housing scheme supporting local communities to deliver the developments they want and need, and I'm pleased to announce the next steps for Cambridge to reach its potential to be the world's leading scientific powerhouse. I confirm there will be a long-term funding settlement for the Future Development Corporation in Cambridge at the next spending review, with over £10 million invested in the coming year to unlock delivery of crucial local transport and health infrastructure. The final levelling up measures I announced today support North Wales, where I have many happy childhood memories, in mould, following representations from the Honourable Member for the Vale of Clwyd. We will help fund the renovation of Theatre Clwyd. And I can announce this week the Government has reached agreement on a £160 million deal with Hitachi to purchase the Wilfer site in Innismarn and the Oldbury site in South Gloucestershire. Innismarn has a vital role in delivering our nuclear ambitions, and no one should take more credit for today's announcement than my tireless, tenacious and turbocharged honourable friend Innismarn. More investment by large businesses, more support for small businesses, promoting investment in our nations and regions, all part of a budget for long-term growth that sticks to our plan to deliver more jobs, better public services and lower taxes. I now turn to one of the most powerful ways to attract investment, namely supporting our most innovative industries. Outside the US, we have the most respected universities, the biggest financial services sector, and the largest tech ecosystem in Europe. We have double the AI startups of anywhere in Europe, double the venture capital investment, and a tech economy now double the size of Germany and 3 times the size of France. We're on track to become the world's next Silicon Valley. In today's budget for long-term growth, I take further steps to attract investment into our technology-related industries. I want our brilliant tech entrepreneurs not just to start here, but to stay here, including when the time comes for a stock market listing. So we'll build on the Edinburgh and Mansion House reforms to unlock more pension fund capital. We'll give new powers to the Pensions Regulator and Financial Conduct Authority to ensure better value from defined contribution schemes by judging performance on overall returns, not cost. We'll make sure there are vehicles to make it easier for pension funds to invest in UK growth opportunities. So I'm today publishing the names of the winners of the LIFTS competition. But I remain concerned that other markets, such as Australia, generate better returns for pension savers with more effective investment strategies and more investment in high-quality domestic growth stocks. So I will introduce new requirements for DC and local government pension funds to disclose publicly their level of international and UK equity investment, and I'll then consider what further action should be taken if we're not on a positive trajectory towards international best practice. I also want to create opportunities for a new generation of retail investors to engage with public markets. So we'll proceed with the retail sale for part of the government's remaining NatWest shares this summer, at the earliest opportunity, subject to supportive market conditions and value for money. We'll continue to explore how savers could be allowed to take their pension pots with them when they change job. We'll make it easier for people to save for the long term with a new British savings bond delivered through National Savings and Investment, offering savers a guaranteed rate fixed for 3 years. And today, following calls from over 200 representatives of the city and our high-growth sectors, I will reform the ISA system to encourage more people to invest in UK assets. After a consultation on its implementation, I will introduce a brand new British ISA, which will allow an additional £5,000 annual investment for investments in UK equity with all the tax advantages of other ISAs. And this will be on top of the existing ISA allowances, ensure British savers can benefit from the growth of the most promising UK businesses, as well as supporting those businesses with the capital to expand. And I turn now to our other growth industries, starting with clean energy. We want nuclear to provide up to a quarter of our electricity by 2050. And as part of that, I want the UK to lead the global race in developing cutting-edge nuclear technologies. I can therefore announce that Great British Nuclear will begin the next phase of the small modular reactor selection process, with companies now having until June to submit their initial tender responses. Our brilliant Energy Security and Net Zero Secretary will also allocate up to £120 million more to the Green Industries Growth Accelerator to build supply chains for new technology ranging from offshore wind to carbon capture and storage. By January of next year, as promised in the autumn statement, we'll have a new faster connections process to the grid up and running. In advanced manufacturing, we've announced a further £270 million of investment into innovative new automotive and aerospace R&D projects, building the UK's capabilities in zero-emission vehicle and clean aviation technologies. And I now turn to our creative industries. We have become Europe's largest film and TV production centre, with Idris Elba, Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom all filming their latest productions here. Studio space in the UK has doubled in the last 3 years, and at the current rate of expansion, next year we will be second only to Hollywood globally. In the autumn statement, I committed to providing more tax relief for visual effects in film and high-end TV. I can today confirm that we will increase the rate of tax credit by 5% and remove the 80% cap for visual effects costs in the audiovisual expenditure credit. Having worked closely with the Culture Secretary and listened carefully to representations from companies like Pinewood, Warner Brothers and Sky Studios, we'll provide eligible film studios in England with a 40% relief on their gross business rates until 2034. And having heard representations from the British film industry, PACT, and indeed the Prime Minister, we will introduce a new tax credit for UK independent films with a budget of less than £15 million. For our creative industries more broadly, we will provide £26 million of funding to our preeminent theatre, the National Theatre, to upgrade its stages. And today I particularly want to recognise the contribution of our creative industries and the tourism that comes from orchestras, museums, galleries and theatres. In the pandemic, we introduced higher 45% and 50% levels of tax relief, which were due to end in March 25. They have been a lifeline for performing arts across the country. Today, in recognition of their vital importance to our national life, I can announce I am making those tax reliefs permanent at 45% for touring and orchestral productions and 40% for non-touring productions. Lord Lloyd Webber says this will be a once-in-a-generation transformational change that will ensure Britain remains the global capital of creativity. I suspect the new theatre reliefs may be of particular interest to the Shadow Chancellor, who seems to fancy her thespian skills when it comes to acting like a Tory. The trouble is, we all know how her show ends. Higher taxes, like every Labour government in history. I'm delighted they are cheering the fact that Labour governments always put up taxes. They're right. And I also want to mention our life sciences sector, where we will support research by medical charities into diseases such as cancer, dementia and epilepsy, with an additional £45 million, including £3 million for Cancer Research UK. But I have long believed we should be manufacturing medicines as well as developing them. So I can today also announce a brand new investment by one of our greatest life science companies, AstraZeneca, led by mon ami, the irrepressible Sir Pascal Soriot. AstraZeneca made their COVID vaccine available to developing countries at cost, as a result saving over 6 million lives. And today, because of the government's support for the life sciences sector, they announced plans to invest £650 million in the UK to expand their footprint on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus and fund the building of a vaccine manufacturing hub in Speke in Liverpool. More investment, better jobs in every corner of the country in a long-term budget for growth from a Conservative government. One of the biggest barriers to investment is businesses not being able to hire the staff they need. The economy today has around 900,000 vacancies. It would be easy to fill them with higher migration, but with over 10 million adults of working age who are not in work, that would be economically and morally wrong. Those who can work should. And this is an issue that I have tackled in every budget and autumn statement I've delivered. A year ago, I abolished the pensions lifetime allowance, which pushed doctors and others to take early retirement. Ask any doctor what they think about Labour's plans to bring it back, and they will say, don't go back to square one. In the autumn, with the help of our superb Work and Pensions Secretary, we announced the Back to Work plan, which will support 1 million adults with medical conditions and reduce the number of people assessed as not needing to work by 2/3. A year ago, I also announced the biggest ever expansion of childcare, extending the 30-hour free childcare offer. Just listen. Extending the 30-hour free childcare offer to all children of working parents from 9 months. We've not had a childcare plan from Labour, so you might want to listen to ours. Our plan will mean an extra 60,000 parents enter the workforce in the next 4 years, a tremendous achievement for the Education Secretary, who I think is doing an effing good job. And today, following representations from many people, including the CBI, I announced measures to support the childcare sector make the new investments it now needs to. So I am guaranteeing the rates that will be paid to childcare providers to deliver our landmark offer for children over 9 months old for the next 2 years. That is more people in work, more jobs, sticking to our plan in a long-term budget for growth. And I now turn to public services. I thought they were supposed to be interested in public services. I can wait.
Order. A little bit of murmuring is normal. I shouldn't be able to hear what you're saying over there. That is clearly out of order. Now, let's have some courtesy. Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Good public services need a strong economy to pay for them. But a strong economy also needs good public services. In 2010, schools in the UK were behind Germany, France and Sweden in the OECD's PISA education rankings for reading and maths. Now, after Conservative reforms, we are ahead of them. Burglaries and violent crime have halved in the last 14 years after we invested in 20,000 more police officers. Our armed forces remain the most professional and best funded in Europe, with defence spending already more than 2% of GDP. We're providing more military support to Ukraine than nearly any other country, and our spending will rise to 2.5% as soon as economic conditions allow. The NHS is still recovering from the pandemic, but has 42,000 more doctors and 71,000 more nurses than it did under Labour. That is 250 more doctors and 400 more nurses for every single month that we've been in office. Now, resources matter, of course, which is why, despite all the economic shocks we have faced, overall spending on public services has gone up since 2010, in the case of the NHS by more than a third in real terms. But although spending has continued to rise every year, public sector productivity still remains below pre-pandemic levels by nearly 6%. This demonstrates that the way to improve public services is not always more money or more people. We also need to run them more efficiently. We need a more productive state, not a bigger state. In autumn 2022, I set day-to-day spending to increase by 1% a year in real terms over the next Parliament. Some say that's not enough and we should raise spending by more. Others say it's too much and we should cut it to improve efficiency. Neither are right. It's not fair to ask taxpayers to pay for more when public service productivity has fallen. Nor would it be wise to reduce that funding given the pressures public services face. So I am keeping the planned growth in day-to-day spending at 1% in real terms, but we are going to spend it better. So today, they don't have a plan for public services, like everything else, so why not listen to ours? Today I am announcing a landmark public sector productivity plan that restarts public service reform and changes the Treasury's traditional approach to public spending. And I start with our biggest and most important public service, the NHS. One of my greatest privileges was to be Health Secretary. Thanks to the NHS, I have 3 gorgeous children, the oldest of whom has been patiently listening in the gallery. The NHS is rightly the biggest reason most of us are proud to be British, but the systems that support its staff are often antiquated. Doctors, nurses and ward staff spend hours every day filling out forms when they could be...
Mr. Streeting,
when patients don't show up...
I don't like to interrupt the Chancellor. You're too close to me to be shouting that loudly. If you want to shout that loudly, you should go and sit away up there. I apologise for interrupting the Chancellor.
When patients don't show up, or one member of a team is ill, operating theatres are left empty despite long waiting lists. Now, when we published the NHS long-term workforce plan, I asked the NHS to put together a plan to transform its efficiency and productivity. I wanted better care for patients, more job satisfaction for staff, and better value for taxpayers. Making changes on the scale we need is not cheap. The investment needed to modernise NHS IT systems so they're as good as the best in the world costs £3.4 billion. But it helps unlock £35 billion of savings, 10 times that amount. So in today's budget for long-term growth, I have decided to fund the NHS productivity plan in full. Yeah. With that new investment, we will slash the 13 million hours lost by doctors and nurses every year to outdated IT systems. We will cut down and potentially halve form filling by doctors using AI. We will digitise operating theatre processes, allowing the same number of consultants to do an extra 200,000 operations a year. We'll fund improvements to help doctors read MRI and CT scans more accurately and quickly, speeding up results for 130,000 patients every year and saving thousands of lives, something I know would have delighted my brother Charlie, who I recently lost to cancer. We'll improve the NHS app so it can be used to confirm and modify all appointments, reducing up to half 500,000 missed appointments annually and improving patient choice. We'll set up a new NHS staff app to make it easier to roster electronically and end the use of expensive off-framework agencies. And as a result of this funding, all hospitals will use electronic patient records, making the NHS the largest digitally integrated healthcare system in the world. Today's announcement doubles the amount the NHS is investing on digital transformation over 3 years. And on top of this longer-term transformation, we'll also help the NHS meet pressures in the coming year with an additional £2.5 billion. This will allow the NHS to continue its focus on reducing waiting times and brings the total increase in NHS funding since the start of the Parliament to 13% in real terms. The NHS was there for us in the pandemic, and today, with nearly £6 billion of additional funding, a Conservative government is there for the NHS. The head of the NHS, Amanda Pritchard, today says that this investment shows the government continues to back the NHS. She says that as a result of it, the NHS can commit to delivering 1.9% annual productivity growth over the next Parliament, more than double the average productivity growth in public services between 2010 and 2019. But today is not just about the NHS. I want this groundbreaking agreement with the NHS to be a model for all our public services. Across education, the police, the courts and local government, I want to see more efficient, better value and higher quality public services. So today I can announce that in the next spending review, the Treasury will do things differently. We will prioritise proposals that deliver annual savings within 5 years, equivalent to the total cost of the investment required. And today we make a start with some excellent proposals. Violence reduction units and hotspot policing have prevented an estimated 136,000 knife crimes and other violent offences, as well as over 3,000 hospital admissions. Every crime costs money, so we will provide £75 million to roll that model out in England and Wales. Police officers waste around 8 hours a week on unnecessary admin. With higher productivity, we could free the equivalent of 20,000 police officers over a year. So we will spend £230 million rolling out time and money-saving technology, which speeds up police response times by allowing people to report crimes by video call and, where appropriate, use drones as first responders. Too many legal cases, particularly in family law, should never go to court, and it would cost us less if they didn't. So we'll spend £170 million to fund non-court resolution, reduce reoffending and digitise the court process. Too many children in care end up being looked after by unregistered providers that are much more expensive. So we'll invest £165 million over the next 4 years to reduce that cost by increasing the capacity of the Children's Homes estate. Special education need provision can be excellent when outsourced to independent sector schools, but also expensive. So we'll invest £105 million over the next 4 years to build 50 new special free schools to create additional high-quality places and increase choice for parents. And we'll also put in place a plan to realise the tens of billions of savings recommended in an excellent speech by the head of the National Audit Office. The OBR say a 5% increase in public sector productivity will be the equivalent of around £20 billion in extra funding. With these plans, we can deliver that and more. And if we ensure they are cash-releasing savings, as we are committed to doing, it will be possible to live with more constrained spending growth without cutting services valued by the public. So with the energy and drive of my talented Chief Secretary to the Treasury, we launch our public sector productivity plan in today's budget for long-term growth, more investment, more jobs, better public services, and one more thing, lower taxes. Keeping taxes down matters to Conservatives in a way it never can for Labour. We believe that in a free society, the money you earn doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to you. And if we want to encourage hard work, we should let people keep as much of their own money as possible. Conservatives look around the world at economies in North America and Asia and notice that countries with lower taxes generally have higher growth. Now, economists argue about cause and correlation, but we know that lower taxed economies have more energy, more dynamism and more innovation, and we know that's Britain's future too. Before I explain how we will bring down taxes, I start with some measures to make our system simpler and fairer. To discourage non-smokers from taking up vaping, we're today confirming the introduction of an excise duty on vaping products from October 26 and publishing a consultation on its design. Because vapes can also play a positive role in helping people quit smoking, we'll introduce a one-off increase in tobacco duty at the same time to maintain the financial incentive to choose vaping over smoking. I'll make a one-off adjustment to rates of air passenger duty on non-economy flights only to account for high inflation in recent years, and I'll provide HMRC with the resources they need to ensure everyone pays the tax they owe, leading to an increase in revenue collected of over £4.5 billion across the forecast period. Next, I turn to property taxation. In recent months, following tenacious representation from the honourable members for St Austell and Newquay, North Devon, cities of London and Westminster, Torbay and Truro and Falmouth, I have been looking closely at our furnished holiday lettings tax regime. I am concerned that this tax regime is creating a distortion, meaning there are not enough properties available for long-term rental by local people. So to make the tax system work better for local communities, I'm going to abolish the furnished holiday lettings regime. I've also been looking at stamp duty relief for people who purchase more than one dwelling in a single transaction, known as multiple dwellings relief. I see the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party paying close attention, given her multiple dwellings.
Order. Too much excitement. We haven't actually heard, because we can't hear what the Chancellor is trying to say. OK, and I can hear who is shouting there. You won't get to speak later. Chancellor.
I'm sorry to disappoint her, but multiple dwellings relief was not actually designed for her, but intended to... It was intended to support investment in the private rented sector, but an external evaluation found no strong evidence that it had done so and that it was being regularly abused, so I'm going to abolish it. And finally, as part of this budget, both the Treasury, a part of our look on property taxation, both the Treasury and the OBR have looked at the costs associated with our current levels of capital gains tax on property. They have concluded that if we reduced the higher 28% rate that exists for residential property, we would in fact increase revenues because there would be more transactions. For the first time in history, both the Treasury and the OBR have discovered their inner Laffer curve. So today I am going to reduce the higher rate of property capital gains tax from 28% to 24%. That really is for you, Angela.
I had enough from over there, definitely not having it from here. Chancellor.
I now turn to oil and gas. Unlike the party opposite, we want to encourage investment in the North Sea, so we will retain generous investment allowances for the sector. We'll also legislate in the finance bill to abolish the energy profits levy should market prices fall to their historic norm for a sustained period of time, after representations from the Honourable Member for Banff and Buchan. But because the increase in energy prices caused by the Ukraine war is expected to last longer, so too will the sector's windfall profits. So I will extend the sunset on the energy profits levy for an additional year to 2029, raising £1.5 billion. Next, I turn to the taxes paid by those who are resident in the UK but not domiciled here for tax purposes. This is a category of people known as non-doms. Now, Nigel Lawson wanted to end the non-dom regime in his great tax reforming budget of 1988, which is where I suspect the Labour Party got the idea from. But I, too, have always believed that provided we protect the UK's attractiveness to international investors, those with the broadest shoulders should pay their fair share. After looking at the issue over many months, I've concluded that we can indeed introduce a system which is both fairer and remains competitive with other countries. So the government will abolish the current tax system for non-doms, get rid of the outdated concept of domicile, aim to please all sides of the House in all my budgets. And we will replace...
Order. This is impossible. Right? Can you just... Order! Could you please shout more quietly? Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will replace the non-dom regime with a modern, simpler and fairer residency-based system. From April 25, new arrivals to the UK will not be required to pay any tax on foreign income and gains for their first 4 years of UK residency, a more generous regime than at present and one of the most attractive offers in Europe. But after 4 years, those who continue to live in the UK will pay the same tax as other UK residents. Recognising the contribution of many of these individuals to our economy, we will put in place transitional arrangements for those benefiting from the current regime. That will include a 2-year period in which individuals will be encouraged to bring wealth earned overseas to the UK, where it can be spent and invested here, a measure that will attract onshore an additional £15 billion of foreign income and generate more than £1 billion of extra tax. Overall, abolishing non-dom status will raise £2.7 billion a year by the end of the forecast period. That is money the party opposite planned to use for spending increases, but today a Conservative government makes a different choice. We use that revenue to help cut taxes on working families. And many of those families, Madam Deputy Speaker, depend on child benefit. But the way we treat child benefit in the tax system is confusing and unfair. It's a lifeline for many parents because it helps with the additional costs associated with having children. And when it works, it's good for children, good for parents, and good for the economy because it helps people into work. But we currently withdraw child benefit when one parent earns over £50,000 a year. That means two parents earning £49,000 a year receive the benefit in full, but a household earning a lot less than that does not, if just one parent earns over £50,000. Today, I set out plans to end that unfairness. Doing so requires significant reform to the tax system, including allowing HMRC to collect household-level information. We'll therefore consult on moving the high-income child benefit charge to a household-based system to be introduced by April 2026. But because that is not a quick fix, I make two changes today to make the current system fairer. Following representations from my right honourable friends from Penistone and Stocksbridge, Carshalton and Wallington, Basset Law and West Worcestershire, along with many others, I confirm that from this April, the high-income child benefit charge threshold will be raised from £50,000 to £60,000. We will raise the top of the taper, at which it's withdrawn, to £80,000. That means no one earning under £60,000 will pay the charge, taking 170,000 families out of paying it altogether. And because of the higher taper and threshold, nearly 500,000 families with children will save an average of £1,300 next year. According to the OBR, this change will see an increase in hours amongst those already working to the equivalent of 10,000 more people entering the workforce. More investment, more jobs, better public service and lower tax. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is one further set of changes I want to make today. The way we tax people's income is particularly unfair. If you get your income from having a job, you pay two types of tax: national insurance contributions and income tax. If you get it from other sources, you pay only one. This double taxation of work is unfair. The result is a complicated system that penalises work instead of encouraging it. If we are to build a high-wage, high-skill economy not dependent on migration, If we want to encourage people not in work to come back to work, we need a simpler, fairer tax system that makes work pay. That is why I cut national insurance contributions in the autumn. By reducing the penalty on work, the OBR said that tax cut would lead to the equivalent of 94,000 more people in work. In other words, it would fill more than 1 in 10 vacancies throughout the economy. Lower taxes, more jobs and higher growth. Today, because of the progress we have made bringing down inflation, because of the additional investment that is flowing into the economy, because we have a plan for better and more efficient public services, and because we have asked those with the broadest shoulders to pay a bit more.
Order. Mr. Perkins. I can manage, thank you very much. 5 times I've heard what you said. I let you away with it. Now that's enough. One more strike and you're out.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do know how hard it is for them to listen to arguments for lower taxes. But that is the difference. Because we have asked those with the broadest shoulders to pay a bit more, today I go further. From April the 6th, employee national insurance will be cut by another 2p from 10% to 8%. And self-employed national insurance will be cut from 8% to 6%. It means an additional £450 a year for the average employee, or £350 for someone self-employed. When combined with the autumn reductions, it means 27 million employees will get an average tax cut of £900 a year. 2 million self-employed will get a tax cut averaging £650. Changes that make our system simpler and fairer, and changes that grow our economy by rewarding work. The OBR say, when combined with the autumn reduction, our national insurance cuts will mean the equivalent of 200,000 more people in work, filling 1 in 5 vacancies, adding 0.4% to GDP and 0.4% to GDP per head. This is the second fiscal event where we've reduced employee and self-employed national insurance. We've cut it by 1/3 in 6 months, without increasing borrowing and without cutting spending on public services. That means the average earner in the UK now has the lowest effective personal tax rate since 1975. Their effective taxes are now lower than in America, France, Germany or any G7 country, because Conservatives believe that making work pay is of the most fundamental importance. Because we believe that the double taxation of work is unfair, our long-term ambition is to end this unfairness when it is responsible, when it can be achieved without increasing borrowing, when it can be delivered without compromising high-quality public services. We will continue to cut national insurance as we have done today, so we truly make work pay. Madam Deputy Speaker, we stick to our plan with a budget for long-term growth. It delivers more investment, more jobs, better public services and lower taxes. But dynamism in an economy doesn't come from ministers in Whitehall. It comes from the grit and determination of people who take risks, work hard and innovate. Not government policies, but people power. It is to unleash people power that we today put this country back on the path to lower taxes. A plan to grow the economy versus no plan. A plan for better public services versus no plan. A plan to make work pay versus no plan. Growth up, jobs up, taxes down. I commend this statement to the House.
Under Standing Order number 51, the first motion, entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes, must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally? The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions: stamp duty, land tax, first-time buyers relief, new leases acquired on bare trust, motion number 8. Stamp duty, land tax, registered providers of social housing, motion number 9. Stamp duty, land tax, purchases by public bodies, motion number 10. Value added tax, late payment interest and repayment interest, motion number 22. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Order, let me explain for the clarification of the House that this is the provisional point, which is the provisional question which is asked at this stage, and that all members will have the opportunity, having heard the debate in detail, to vote on each of these motions next Tuesday, the 12th of March, at the end of the budget debate. I would hesitate to have a division at this point when the House and the world is awaiting the response from the Leader of the Opposition. So I'm going to put this motion again, and if it is very clear to me that the ayes have more votes than the noes, I will take it on the voices. The question is, no, I don't need a point of order, thank you. We're in the middle of a division. Thank you. The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act, as I said a few moments ago, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. Division. Clear the lobby. Shouting. The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions: Stamp duty land tax, motion number 8. Stamp duty land tax, motion number 9. Stamp duty land tax, motion number 10. And value added tax, motion number 22. As mayors that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tellers for the ayes, Aaron Bell and Robert Largan. Tellers for the noes, Gavin Newlands and Kirsty Blackman. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 288. The noes to the left, 38. Thank you.
The ayes to the right, 288. The noes to the left, 38. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to the motion entitled Income Tax Charge. It is on this motion that the debate will take place today and on the succeeding days. The questions on this motion and on the remaining motions will be put at the end of the budget debate on Tuesday, the 12th of March. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the motion formally. The question is that income tax is charged for the tax year 2024 to 25, and it is declared that it is expedient in the public interest that this resolution should have statutory effect under the provisions of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There we have it, the last desperate act of a party that has failed. Britain in recession, the national credit card maxed out, and despite the measures today, the highest tax burden for 70 years. The first Parliament since records began to see living standards fall, confirmed by this budget today. That is their record. It is still their record. Give with one hand and take even more with the other. And nothing they do between now and the election will change that. I mean, over 14 years, we've seen our fair share of delusion from the party opposite. A Prime Minister who thinks the cost of living crisis is starting to ease. An Education Secretary who thinks concrete crumbling on our children deserves her gratitude. A former Prime Minister who still believes crashing the pound was the right path for Britain.
Where is she?
And today, a new entry in this hall of infamy, the Chancellor, who breezes into this chamber in a recession and tells the working people of this country that everything's on track. Crisis? What crisis? Or, as the captain of the Titanic and the former Prime Minister herself might have said, iceberg? What iceberg? Smiling as the ship goes down, the Chuckle Brothers of decline, dreaming of Santa Monica, or maybe just a quiet life in Surrey, not having to self-fund his election, whilst the crew behind them scrabble for GB news bubbles. If only it weren't so serious, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the story of this Parliament is devastatingly simple. A Conservative party stubbornly clinging to the failed ideas of the past, completely unable to generate the growth working people need, and forced by that failure to ask them to pay more and more for less and less. And as the desperation grows, they torch not only their reputation for fiscal responsibility, but any notion that they can serve the country, not themselves. Party first, country second, while working people pay the price. Food prices still 25% higher than they were 2 years ago. Rents up 10%. An extra £240 a month for a typical family remortgaging this year, because they lost control of the economy, they sent interest rates through the roof, they made working people pay. They should be under no illusion. That record is how the British people will judge today's cuts, because the whole country can see exactly what is happening here. They recognise a Tory con when they see it, just as they did in November. Give with one hand, take even more with the other. Madam Deputy Speaker, people have been living through this nonsense for 14 years. They know the thresholds are still frozen, dragging more and more people into higher taxes. They know that a Tory stealth tax is coming their way in the shape of their next council tax bill. The Levelling Up Secretary has told not just this House, but every house in the country he's coming for their council tax. Give with one hand, gove in the other. But most insultingly of all, the British people know the only cause that gets this lot out of bed is trying to save their own skin. Take the desperate move, after years of resistance, to finally accept Labour's argument on the non-dom tax regime. Has there ever been a more obvious example of a government that is totally bereft of ideas? And if they're sincere in support of this policy now, then the question they must answer today is, why did they not do it earlier? Why did they not stand up to their friends, their funders and their family? Because if they had followed Labour's example, 3.8 million extra operations would have taken place by now. 1.3 million emergency dental appointments, 3 breakfast clubs for nearly 4.5 million children. But if, instead, this is just another short-term, cynical political gimmick, then honestly, what is the point of them? What is the point of a party that is out of touch, out of ideas, and nearly out of road? And we saw it last year as well, when only Labour's policies on the cost of living made the difference. For those opposite, now a little downbeat about another intellectual triumph for social democracy, I say get used to it, because with this pair in charge, it won't be long before they ask you to defend the removal of private school tax relief as well. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the harder they try with cynical games like this, the worse it will get for them, because the whole country can see exactly who they are, fighting for themselves, politics not governing, party first, country second. Madam Deputy Speaker, because we have campaigned to lower the tax burden on working people for the whole Parliament, and we won't stop now, we will support the cuts to national insurance today. But I noticed this. In 2022, when the Prime Minister was Chancellor, he made this promise. I can confirm in 2024, for the first time, the basic rate of income tax will be cut from 20 to 19 pence. Having briefed that all week that an income tax was coming, that promise is in tatters today. And of course, we support the fresh investment in our NHS, although I have to note that the Chancellor, when he was Health Secretary 10 years ago, promised to make the NHS paperless by 2018. And I know the Prime Minister's fondness for Elon Musk extends to an enthusiastic embrace of his community notes on fact-checking, so I'll say this bit slowly. Labour supports the fuel duty freeze. That is our policy, and I look forward to the Prime Minister's acknowledgement of that in coming days. We do ask the Chancellor can set out how we will make sure that this policy gets passed on to hard-pressed families at the pump. Yet, Madam Deputy Speaker, for all the fanfare around the tax measures today, that straightforward story remains true. Taxes, a 70-year high. The British people paying more for less. An unprecedented hit to living standards of working people. The first time they've gone backwards over a parliament, and they were cheering that today. And the reason is equally simple. There is no plan for growth. How can there be? He can say long-term plan all he likes. We see there. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, last year he announced 110 growth measures. He said we've turned the corner. And where are we now? Britain in recession. An economy smaller than when the Prime Minister entered Downing Street. The textbook definition of decline, that is their record. I mean, after 14 years, who do they actually think feels better off? Productivity is flat. Mortgages through the roof. House building off a cliff. Worklessness rising and rising. Homelessness never higher. Crime virtually unpunished. Children who can't see a dentist. Sewage in our rivers. Billions and billions of taxpayers' money wasted. 7 billion by the Prime Minister on COVID fraud alone. 500 million on the Rwanda scheme that has achieved precisely nothing. I can keep going. A railway line that will never reach our great northern cities. In fact, it might not even reach central London. Billions upon billions for a white elephant without a trunk. While today we learn taxpayers are picking up the bill for the Science Minister's libel. And all the time, one thing that is growing, the waiting list in our NHS, now nearly 8 million. They've had 14 years. 14 years running out of road. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is what decline looks like. And the complacency they've shown today, it takes your breath away. Britain deserves better than this. Britain deserves a real plan for growth, an end to 14 years of stagnation, wealth creation across the whole of the country, higher living standards for working people. This is the mission we need. But yet again, what we got was the same tired old formula, the sticking plasters, the chopping and changing, the party first, country second politics, with no repudiation of the utterly discredited idea that economic growth is something the few gift to the many. But even then, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think his backbenchers are owed an explanation. Because when the Chancellor says Britain has grown more quickly than countries like Germany over the last 14 years, I'm sure they will be shocked to learn that this is a statistical sleight of hand. And when it comes to GDP per capita, in other words, the growth that makes the difference to the pockets of working people, their record is much worse. Indeed, in per capita terms, our economy has not grown since the first quarter of 2022, the longest period of stagnation Britain has seen since 1955. In fact, the Chancellor invited us to look at those figures. The OBR says GDP per capita will be 0.75% lower in 2028 than was they forecast in November of last year. That was the number he said we should watch. 0.75% lower in 2028. And they can call this a technical recession, but there's nothing technical about working people living in recession for every second the Prime Minister has been in power. This is a Rishi recession. And if the party opposite really wants to know what hides in the Chancellor's spreadsheets, then they will see that it's only the record levels of migration they have delivered which has prevented an even deeper decline. And that is the record they must stand on at the election. Because while on these benches we do not demean for a second the contribution migrants make to a thriving economy, it is high time the party opposite was honest with the British public about the role migration plays in their economic policy. Because right now, in terms of growth, that is all they have. There is nothing else. No plan to get Britain building again with a reformed planning system. No ambition to invest in clean British power for cheaper bills and energy security. No inclination to move away from insecure, low-paid jobs and strengthen employment rights so we can finally make work pay. Madam Deputy Speaker, where is the urgency on affordable housing? How can they look at Britain now and not see this as a massive priority? Never again will they be allowed to pose as the party of home ownership and aspiration. I have to say, given the disaster that's befallen his childcare plans, perhaps that's for the best. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the cost of childcare is a huge challenge for millions. Parents need him to deliver on his promise. And it seems the Chancellor's been taking lessons on marketing from the Willy Wonka experience in Glasgow. All is not as it seems. And with just over 3 weeks to go, he has to come clean. Because up and down the country, parents need to know, will they get their entitlement in April, or is it just another of their reckless promises on governing? Headlines over delivery, promises without plans, policies that unravel at the first contact with reality. The lesson crystal clear that those who broke our economy cannot be trusted to repair it. The Tory credit rating is 0. It's time for change with Labour. And that's what today's budget should have been about. A last chance for the government to show it understands the economic reality of our volatile world, that global supply chains can be weaponised by tyrants like Putin, that a sticking plaster approach to public investment will cost Britain more in the long run, and that trickle-down nonsense means working people pay the price. It could even have been a moment of contrition, a reflection on their fiscal recklessness, an apology, perhaps, for the ridiculous chaos they've inflicted on businesses, communities and investors in this country. And yet still no sustainable industrial strategy, still no national wealth fund to crowd in private investment, still no urgency on speeding up critical infrastructure projects, and no recognition that they have left our standing as a country that always keeps its promises in tatters. And if they don't like that accusation, then look no further than the grotesque spectacle of ducking their responsibility to the victims of infected blood and Horizon scandal. One of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. Those were the Prime Minister's words just 2 months ago. Today, justice kicked beyond the general election. No, Madam Deputy Speaker. Britain can see exactly who they are. And the reality is there is no path to economic stability, no way to a calmer, less chaotic politics with the party opposite in power, because chaos is now their worldview, a mindset that sees Britain's problems as opportunities they can exploit. Whether, like the Chancellor, that's out of desperation because they can't solve them, or whether, like the members for Fareham or South West Norfolk, they have no intention of solving them whatsoever. For a party this weak and divided, the end result is always the same. A vicious downward spiral. Chaos feeding off decline, decline feeding off chaos, while working people pay the price. The British people know this will not stop. 5 more years and it will only get worse. There will be no change of direction without a change of government. And that leaves Britain a nation in limbo, unable to shake off the Tory chaos that dragged us into recession and loaded the tax burden onto the backs of working people and maxed out the nation's credit card. Britain deserves a government ready to take tough decisions, give our public services an immediate cash injection, stick to fiscal rules without complaint, fight for the living standards of working people and deliver a sustainable plan for growth. So we say to the Chancellor and Prime Minister, it's time to break the habit of 14 years, stop the dithering, stop the delay, stop the uncertainty and confirm May the 2nd as the date of the next general election, because Britain deserves better and Labour are ready.
I'm not going to demand silence now. This is the moment for cheering. You can do that some more.
Chairman of the Select Committee, Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know it hasn't been long since we had an autumn statement, but I still think that we heard today that the Leader of the Opposition has no plan. It's not been very long since we had the last forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. So I thought it was interesting to read today that in the just over 100 days since they made their last forecast, there have been a lot of changes for the better in the UK economy. In particular, I'd like to highlight that they are expecting better inflation outturn than they were just over 3 months ago. They're expecting and have noted the sharper fall in interest rates that we all pay on the national mortgage. And they have also said that they're expecting living standards for the British people to recover more quickly than they were previously forecasting. And I think this is information that we can all welcome today, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I know there will be a range of views across this chamber about the role of the Office for Budget Responsibility. And of course, we all know that forecasts are all likely to be wrong. We will be scrutinising the Office for Budget Responsibility next Tuesday morning in the Treasury Select Committee, and we look forward to asking them the questions about their assumptions. But my view in terms of their role is a bit like the Sir Winston Churchill quote about democracy, that it's the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried. So I think that although all economic forecasts are likely to be wrong in some way, and the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts certainly often will not be the most accurate, I think it's a lot better than the alternative of either the Treasury marking its own homework or indeed better than having a budget with no forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility at all, because I think it reassures the markets on which we are so dependent for our borrowing. Now, there's obviously been good and even better progress on inflation since the peak of over 11% after Putin's evil invasion of Ukraine. And it's vital that all of today's budget measures are looked at through the lens of the inflation, because we don't want to have anything that could could prevent that progress towards 2% that the Bank of England is expecting by the middle of this year. And I think that we heard today from the Chancellor that he has looked through exactly that lens when he has announced the measures today. So there are a range of things that will really help. The 5 pence off the price of fuel at the pump going on for another year will be very helpful to drivers in West Worcestershire and elsewhere in the country. The freeze on alcohol duty will be welcomed in the pubs across West Worcestershire and across the country. And the public sector productivity plan, I think, is crucial to make sure that we get value for money from our public services. Now, when it comes to the second economic objective of growth, I think we can all welcome the fact that employment growth has been so strong that the economy has created over 800 jobs a day over the last 14 years. And at previous fiscal events, we've seen steps in the plan that help grow the productive size of the UK economy, because now that we're at full employment, that becomes incredibly important because it helps sustain non-inflationary growth. So to take one example, Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of stimulating that all-important investment into the economy, the big announcement a year ago was the full expensing of investment, and indeed that was made permanent at the autumn statement. Today we heard it's going to be extended to leased assets as well. And what the BBC in their fact check has noticed, that when this was first announced, it was expected that the economy would benefit greatly. The Chancellor said its impact on the economy will be huge. And the Office for Budget Responsibility said it would increase business investment by 3% a year. Well, in fact, since the policy came into force on the 1st of April, we've seen the level of business investment for the whole of the year last year was 6.1% higher than it was in 2022. So we heard today some more welcome steps that will increase business investment and other investment into the UK economy. Whether it was the tax reliefs in some of the creative industries, whether it was the announcement for British ISAs, which should encourage more investment and long-term investment into our economy, the Back to Work plan, the childcare plan. There were lots of other measures that will unlock growth. I will give way.
For giving way, but I just wonder if she thinks that the Chancellor, indeed herself, is being a little bit complacent over the issue of investment, because although it's true that business investment is higher now than it was in 2010, it's still the lowest in the G7 and amongst the lowest in the OECD. So why haven't we seen more public investment from the Chancellor today? Because we know that public investment will crowd in that private investment. Why haven't we seen much bolder, more ambitious work on investment today, which is what this economy is crying out for?
Today from the Chancellor about how strong the growth in UK investment has been. We've heard additional investment in terms of the productivity of our National Health Service, and we also heard, and I think this is absolutely crucially important, measures that will increase the attractiveness in investment in some of the fastest growing sectors across this economy. And I give way to my friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend to give way. Does she agree with me that it's extraordinary that the honourable member for the representing the Green Party didn't welcome the 270 million for advanced manufacturing in clean aviation, in clean vehicles, the 120 million in clean tech manufacturing? This is the UK investing in the technology of clean growth, is it not?
Well, it is indeed, and I'm glad that my honourable friend welcomes it, even if it was not welcomed by the representative of the Green Party. I think that what we can see in terms of, if I just make a little, do you want to talk on investment?
I want to just take her back to what she just said about the investment in childcare, and remind her, of course, that this week brings International Women's Day, and that cost of childcare is such an important issue for so many mums in this country. And of course it was the Conservatives who rolled out the 30 hours of free childcare. It's the Conservatives who are rolling out free childcare to 2-year-olds and 9 months old. And we absolutely must welcome that additional investment for childcare, and indeed in families through the support and child benefit that will help mums to get into well-paid jobs.
I wholeheartedly endorse what my honourable friend has said, and she is absolutely right to point to the importance of this investment in childcare in helping female employment growth. And female employment growth has already been remarkably strong over the last 14 years, and I'm confident that these measures will make further progress in increasing the non-inflationary growth capacity of the UK economy. I think there were other measures that are announced today that will help on the growth front. I think cutting national insurance again is also a smart way to help growth. It not only adds money into working people's pockets, of 27 million people across this country will see an extra £900 a year in terms of money in their bank accounts, but it will also make work more attractive. And we've heard from the Office for Budget Responsibility that actually it's cutting national insurance that has the biggest marginal impact in bringing people back into work. 94,000 from the last cut. It'll be interesting to see whether they continue to expect that to have a significant impact. It's a really smart way to cut taxes for working people. And another point that I'd like to make about it is that it's UK-wide, so that it will be felt in Scotland as well. In terms of debt falling, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can see that the bond markets have stabilised. The Office for Budget Responsibility numbers confirm that progress in terms of debt. I want to just bring the House's attention to a report that we just recently published in our committee that focuses on the Bank of England and its quantitative tightening. They themselves are selling £100 billion of gilts into the market over the course of this year. They've acknowledged that this actually increases the cost to the exchequer of borrowing by probably about 1/10 to 1/4 of a percentage point. And so I think as a cross-party committee, we wanted to flag up the impact that that could potentially have and send a message to the Bank of England, the independent Bank of England, about some of the ways in which quantitative tightening does have an impact on the real economy. And as a cross-party committee, we obviously are never going to agree on the level or scope of taxes between us, but one of the things that we do have unanimity, and does he want to come on the fact that the rate of tax is higher in Scotland?
What I do want to raise is the issue of quantitative easing that she's just highlighted, because there's obviously going to be a very significant supply of gilts over the course of the coming period, and that obviously is going to have an impact on the gilt market, on yields that are there, and of course it will influence the Bank of England and what happens in the interest rate cycle. And crucially, out of all of that, it's going to make it pretty difficult in the coming period to see any material growth in money supply, particularly M4. That is going to impact growth, given where we are.
Well, I'm sorry he didn't acknowledge that income tax is higher in Scotland, but he does make a very good point about quantitative tightening and its impact on the real economy, and it is potentially out there as a factor that can have a real impact, and we will be watching it very closely on our committee. We're, as a cross-party committee, never going to agree on the level and scope of taxes, but we do agree that the tax system is too complicated. We have a very complicated tax system in this country with well over 1,000 different tax reliefs. But I do think that despite the abolition of the Office for Tax Simplification, there have been some major tax simplifications under this Chancellor. We've heard about the way in which he eliminated in the autumn statement the national insurance class. We've heard about how he has simplified the lifetime allowance for pensions. And we also have heard today that he has started to tackle some of the very perverse cliff edges, high marginal tax rates and disincentives to work that do exist throughout the tax system. By raising the VAT tax threshold, he has helped small businesses who may hold back because they don't want to go through that. And in terms of universal credit, we've done so much over the years to reduce those high marginal tax rates and disincentives. And so it was great to hear the Chancellor today really focus on addressing this high-income child benefit charge. Yeah. When we brought it in, and I voted for it at the time, £50,000 a year was a high rate of income. With the progress in terms of higher incomes, the median income in those days was about £22,000. Now the median income is about £35,000. And so £50,000 these days is not more than about 40% over the median income. And that's why it was absolutely right today that the Chancellor recognised that in his budget statement. And he has made the taper that much less of a disincentive to people taking on work above that income level. Of course, I'd have loved to have seen him do even more, but I am very grateful for what he has done. Did someone try and intervene on me? Was that, no, I was just hallucinating there. Right, I will come to a rapid close then, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, what I want to say is that it is clear that on this side of the House, there is a plan. It is clear that there is a plan to get inflation down. It is clear there's a plan for increasing the growth rate and the growth capacity of the UK economy without sparking inflation again. And it's clear that there is a plan to get debt falling. And I think we can all see that that plan is working. I think we should stick to that plan and not go back to square one.
Before I call the spokesman for the SNP, it might be helpful for members. It's all right, everyone could sit down now. It might be helpful for honourable members to know that I hope to be able to manage the debate, certainly at the beginning, without a formal time limit. And if everybody speaks for around 6 to 7 minutes, then we will manage that without a formal time limit. If we can't quite manage that, we will put on a formal time limit, which will begin with around 7 minutes, but will reduce as the day goes on. I now call the spokesman for the SNP, Drew Hendry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And traditional at this point, I would thank the Chancellor for advance sight of his redacted statement. But having seen the statement, I realise I was given an entirely different redacted document. But not to worry, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've seen all the details in the press over the past day or so. Seeing those unredacted words is nice, but not essential for this response. I can also thank the Chancellor for the courtesy of staying, unlike some of his colleagues, in the chamber to listen to the words of the third party here. It doesn't happen all the time, but I think it's very, very good practice for a party that might well be in the position of third party after the next election. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor during his autumn statement said that that was a statement for growth. But what have we seen since his autumn statement? Growth has gone down. It's grown into recession, in fact. And the OBR are saying today, having steadily declined since early 2022, real GDP per person is forecast to trough at 1.25% below its pre-pandemic peak in the first half of 2024. So that was not a statement for growth, and this is not a budget for growth. Again, I do, like with the Chancellor, like to start with some measures that I would welcome from his points that he's made today. First of all, albeit the softest possible landing he could have given them, the decision to at least address the non-dom status is a positive move forward. The changes to child benefit, and here we must give credit to Paul Lewis, who's campaigned on this, and indeed, similar to the press, Paul Lewis has tweeted today that he was tipped off by the Chancellor that this was coming, so that's very good as well. The lifetime ISAs move is welcome. The R&D support for aerospace, although the smallest possible step that could have been taken in investment in this industry, again, is something to be welcomed, as is for any further investment in life sciences with this. The Chancellor has put a lot of store on productivity in his speech today. He's going to solve everything with productivity. Yet if we look back over the past 14 years, and indeed before that, one of the things that the UK has been exceptionally poor at is productivity. It hasn't budged at all. So I don't see how the Chancellor, productivity, look at the figures for Scotland. He's saying, what about Scotland? Look at the figures for Scotland over the past 14 years and we can have that debate. He said earlier that vacancies would be easy to fill with immigration. This is the party who imposed Brexit, joined by the Labour Party and now the Lib Dems, and stopped free movement. Of course it would be easy to fill vacancies with people, skilled people who want to do the jobs that we have, who want to fill those vital jobs in tourism, hospitality, the National Health Service, the Care Service, and across many other sectors. But of course that's been taken away by this place. Now, his national insurance cuts today are already being measured by the economists who are looking at this, to point out that the gains will be cancelled, as was last time, by the freeze on thresholds. There's very, very little for people on low incomes, zero for 17.8 million people on less than £12,750. So there is not a lot of sense in the measure that he's taken. He also boasted about the fact of taking over with inflation at 11%, but I think it's important for us to remember the Tory government was in charge when inflation was at 11%. It is their child, this problem with inflation. And they also suggest that somehow 4% is a triumph. 4% is still 4% inflation. Prices still go up. This is, let's face it, this is a last-ditch, tone-deaf approach to desperately try to recover in the polls. It's the embodiment of the Tory party before the people. Where are the real measures that have real impact on the cost of living? The one thing that people need the most direct help with. For those living in fear of the energy bill, being told once again that their direct debits are increasing, slicing more off their take-home pay, none of this is more than cold comfort. To those people staring in disbelief as they realise that their shopping bills are more than 25% higher than they were a couple of years ago, this will stick in their throats. To those trust to their new much higher mortgages and rents directly because of reckless decisions of this place, the walls are closing in for them. And on public services, he's failed people again. Paul Johnson of the IFS noted that the Chancellor would have to explain how public services already on their knees could possibly take more cuts. So let's not forget the £19 billion he slashed from public spending in the autumn statement. They also noted the economic case for tax cuts is weak. The public finances remain in a poor position. And the Chancellor is, in his budget today, promoting a further £20 billion cut, according to the IFS. Public services have already been left struggling after 14 years of underfunding, 14 years of economic chaos and blunder from mini-budgets to Brexit, colossal wastes of hundreds of billions of pounds and fraud and cronyism. Public finances are now so pared to the bone that we can see the marrow. Is it any wonder that a growing number of English councils, one by one, with a Tory, Labour or Lib Dem run, are now effectively bankrupt? People in Scotland needed a budget that delivered funding that would have allowed investment for our public services, real investment in the NHS that supports families, a budget that supports families with the cost of living taken into account and properly invests in green energy. Not another austerity Chancellor taking an even bigger axe to investment than his predecessors. When it does come to that election in Scotland, they will have their say and they will have their choice. It's a clear choice between SNP calls to invest in public services and the economy and in our communities, in our town centres and city centres, in our manufacturing future, in our rural areas, in our tourism industry, in our food and drink sector, in the priorities they hold, in the values that they hold dear. These will be the major dividing lines at the general election. The Scottish Government is committed to protecting people from some of the worst Westminster policies and is making a real difference to the lives of people in Scotland despite their limited powers. The Prime Minister might be under the impression that the cost of living crisis is easing, but that assessment will be a slap in the face for households across Scotland who are still facing the consequences of over a decade of Tory cuts and mismanagement of the economy. People will see straight through attempts by the Chancellor to make up for falling living standards and underfunded public services and wage stagnation with this poorly timed national insurance cut that for most households won't improve their overall standard of life. And leaving aside his failure to deal with the fiscal drag, which, as I said, wipes out much of the benefit of the NI cuts, leaving aside the vast inequality in both benefits to the better off by his actions and the geographical effect that means London benefits much more than anywhere else, he can't escape the fact that the government has now imposed the highest tax burden since the end of World War II. And I want to tackle the issues of tax in Scotland. It comes there. In Scotland, our progressive moves that mean that not only do the majority of people pay less tax, but they also pay far lower council tax than in England. They're supported with free prescriptions, don't have to pay tuition fees and get the game-changing Scottish Child Payment and more. Doing what is right, investing in our people, not leaving them high and dry. Whilst the Tories cut public funding in England, the Scottish Government's progressive approach to income tax has worked to raise a significant revenue to invest in public services in Scotland. The Scottish Government's tax regime means that on average households in the lower half of the income distribution are £400 better off a year than they would be in the rest of the UK. Around 58% of households are better off under the Scottish tax and social security system than they would be in the rest of the UK. Taking a different progressive course on income tax in Scotland means that in 24-25, the Scottish Fiscal Commission estimates that the Scottish Government will have around £1.5 billion of additional revenues compared to if it had followed the UK Government's tax policies. The Scottish Government continues to reaffirm their social contract with the Scottish people, with people across Scotland reaping the benefits through, as I've said, free prescription, free university tuition, free school meals, free bus travel for the under-22s, free dental care until 26, publicly owned rail services and free childcare for 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds, and 7 additional welfare payments, including, as I've noted, the revolutionary Scottish Child Payment. Now, before I move on to other matters, let's just talk about the economy and the other measure that that the Chancellor mentioned today, which was freezing the tax on Scotch whisky. As in the autumn statement, you'd say that is not enough. This is a massive industry to Scotland. It's a massive export for both Scotland in terms of food and drink and indeed the UK, and yet it's still taxed at 70-odd%. They needed a cut in that tax today in order to deliver what they could do. And the fact that it wasn't addressed in the budget is a shame on them. Austerity is an ever-decreasing circle, and it's fiscal madness to pursue the same policies that have been failing so obvious for many years. Yet none of these parties can bear to face the truth that for an economy to grow, it needs proper investment, for public services to deliver, to free up the potential of our people. They need to be supported, not asset stripped and starved of those resources. The Chancellor mentioned £2.5 billion for digitisation of the NHS in order to get those so-called productivity gains. How much of that is going to go to private companies, I wonder, when the dust settles? They should have boosted NHS spending by £15 billion to improve healthcare after the UK Government imposed real terms cuts this year. Funding NHS pay properly to match Scotland, where there have been no NHS strikes and caught up for their previous cuts. Where was the announcement on settling with the victims of the contaminated blood scandal? Missing. Moving on to the economy, he should have turbocharged investment in green energy by investing at least £28 billion a year to compete in the global green energy gold rush. and secure sustained economic growth. Where else is the serious high-return growth supposed to come from? We haven't heard it mentioned here today. We don't know where it is. That £28 billion is needed. The Labour advisers have told the Labour Party that £28 billion a year is needed. Everybody knows that £28 billion a year is needed, and yet none of them are willing to make the investment that's needed to protect us. The abandonment of the just transition, and it's fantastic. Oh, they're chuntering from a sedentary position on the Labour front bench. Oh dear! Oh dear! Oh dear! Imagine picking up on that one. Their big U-turn, their big abandonment of the just transition. Well, it's a pretty big U-turn. I know it's one of many, but it's a pretty big U-turn. The fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the fact that they're rattled, I think, just shows how much they feel this. Their and the government's abandonment of the just transition and its fantastic opportunity from the Tories and from the shadows in the Labour Party is reckless and stupid, economically and for the desperate need to act on climate change. The failure to invest in this will hold back Scotland from reaching our green energy ambitions and leave households vulnerable to future energy crises. The Chancellor must finally match the level of ambition we're seeing in other countries. They've been shown by the European Union, by the United States with their Inflation Reduction Act, that this is an issue that needs to be taken seriously, and yet they are sitting on their hands. Scotland can be at the forefront of the green energy revolution thanks to our incredible natural resources inshore and offshore wind, wave, tidal and hydro power. But with Labour and the Tories intent on pulling the rug from under the industry's feet, we risk seeing yet another generation of energy potential wasted by Westminster. So the Chancellor should finally commit to properly investing in renewables and must decouple the price of gas from the price of electricity. You cannot ensure a just transition from oil and gas for the people and communities that rely on it if you squeeze the life out of the sector overnight. We know that households across Scotland have been badly hit by the energy crisis, and proper investment in renewables can reduce the bills for households. Citizens Advice Scotland revealed that in the last 4 years, they've seen the number of people requesting advice and support with energy bills increase by 14 times. The Labour Party are saying, again from a sedentary position, that I'm going on too long. I take that as a sign they're not comfortable with what I'm saying here, and they would like me to. They're bored. They're bored by the just transition. They're bored by the cost of energy that people have to bear. They're bored by all these things.
About to ask for order so that the honourable gentleman could be heard, but I think that the noise is coming from immediately behind him. But as I have, the honourable gentleman mustn't shout at me. You can shout at other people, but don't shout at me. Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can make more progress if uninterrupted, so I do appreciate your advice on that. Talking of advice, I want to come back to Citizens Advice Scotland. They revealed that in the last 4 years they've seen the number of people requesting advice and support with energy bills increase by 14 times. That's a shocking increase. And proper investment in green energy can make sure that people in Scotland never have to face an energy crisis of this scale again. Now, you could have, as I said, helped families with the cost of living by scrapping grossly unfair and unequal energy bill standing charges and using a £12 billion wealth tax to fund a £400 annual energy discount for households, reintroduced mortgage interest tax relief, capped supermarket food prices and matched the Scottish Child Payment UK-wide. It could have boosted UK finances, but he chose not to. By increasing He could have introduced a long overdue essentials guarantee while scrapping callous policies such as the two-child limit and the benefit cap. And of course, one of the most game-changing things he could have done is finally give up on the failed experiment that has been Brexit, rejoin the EU single market and deliver economic growth. Now, the Chancellor must support businesses and introduce measures to support tourism and the hospitality industries. We know that businesses have faced a very challenging period with COVID, Brexit and increased costs from all sides, making life more difficult for people across Scotland. That's why the SNP are calling on the Chancellor to reduce the rate of VAT for the tourism and hospitality sector. It's not too late for him to do that, to reinstate VAT-free shopping for international visitors, and to implement VAT-free streets to support struggling town centres and high streets. If nothing is done to halt the decline, they continue to be ignored, as they have been for too long, then communities will suffer and far more tax will be lost in the longer term than providing them with some support. They could choose to construct these mini enterprise zones, working with devolved governments and local authorities to agree sectors and areas where support is most needed. They could benefit from the reductions in VAT, or if the need is great enough, then no VAT. This could be tied to, for example, businesses agreeing to pay the real living wage. As the Chief Executive of Marks and Spencer said yesterday, he's described operating under the current government as like, and I quote, running up a downwards escalator with a rucksack on your back. If the government can roll out free ports, then why not free ports for people? They could reduce, as I've said, alcohol duty for whisky and other spirits and support Scotland's thriving whisky sector that adds £7.1 billion to the UK economy. Businesses in Scotland can no longer afford to be held back by the UK's low-growth economy. So the Chancellor should bring in measures to support businesses that have been left paying the price for the UK government's disastrous Brexit. It's clear that the SNP is the only party committed to rejoining the EU and giving Scottish businesses the chance to access goods and talent from our 27 closest neighbours. The Scottish Government is committed to protecting people of Scotland from some of the worst Westminster policies and is making a real difference to the lives of people in Scotland despite their limited powers. The cut to the Scottish Government's capital budget and finance transactions has meant that they've had to take some very difficult decisions in this year's budget, but they're still committed to delivering for the people of Scotland. The SNP fully support the £3.3 billion package the UK Government have delivered for Northern Ireland and urge the Chancellor to make similar funding available in line with the Barnett formula to help the Scottish Government deal with the budget pressures they are facing. So the Scottish Government are freezing the council tax, or at least freezing the council tax except in Tory, Lib Dem and some Labour councils where they think that people should pay more. They're lifting 100,000 children out of poverty with measures like the Scottish Child Payment, providing support to help mitigate additional heating costs that households of the most severely disabled children and young people face in the winter months through the child winter housing payments, provide free school meals to all children in primaries 1 to 5 and eligible children throughout the school, providing all babies in Scotland with the essentials needed for the first 6 months of a child's life through the baby box, and introducing 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare to all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. Making bus travel free for 2 million people in Scotland, including all children and young people under 22, eligible disabled people and everybody 60 or over. This is just a snapshot of some of the landmark policies the Scottish Government has brought in. And all of these have been achieved against the backdrop of limited powers and being tied to a Westminster system that, as we've seen from this budget today, continues to do nothing for the people of Scotland.
Just to emphasise what Madam Deputy Speaker said, it would be very helpful if colleagues could confine their remarks to, now it's probably 6 minutes, so that we can get everybody in with equal time. Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to follow the honourable gentleman who spoke for the SNP. I was waiting to hear how the experiment with higher taxation is going. And I would invite the SNP to see if they can publish the figures showing how many of the top 10 philanthropists in Scotland 5 years ago are still paying tax in Scotland, and how the top 10 individual taxpayers in Scotland 5 years ago are doing now. And then, well, it's an example. The SNP don't like having questions put to them. There you are. When the Leader of the Opposition started speaking, it sounded to begin with as though it was the voice of his health spokesman speaking. But I also reflected on his reflection over the last few years. It's in the memory of the House that in 2017 and 2019, he wanted the Prime Minister to be his right honourable friend, the member for Islington North. When there was a vacancy to be leader of the Labour Party in succession to the right honourable gentleman, the candidate who was most close to Islington North was the person who is now the Leader of the Opposition. And his journey over the last couple of years in changing his views or his approach seems to be quite significant. I think people can believe that the Labour Party wants to change. For example, in the town where I represent two-thirds of it, in one of the constituencies, none of the local councillors was judged suitable to be put in a shortlist to be selected as the parliamentary candidate. That shows central power in the hands of the Leader of the Opposition and his National Executive, which I think most people would have found surprising. If I'd been one of the Labour councillors told I couldn't apply, I'd have got pretty upset. The reaction I've had from my constituents to the financial statement and the budget have come down to one particular point where someone said, could there please be a change on the level of pension pot that requires financial advice? When that was brought in 2015, the level was £30,000. My constituent, who has a pension pot of £32,500, has been quoted £7,000 for advice on how to be able to realise this relatively small pension pot. I had asked Treasury Ministers to consider whether in the finance bill they can lift that figure, say, to £40,000 or £50,000, so that people who want to gather up a small part of their defined benefit pension can use it. The second reaction I had from a constituent was that since Labour took control of Worthing Borough Council, two-thirds of the reserves have gone within 2 years, and people are worrying whether the council can remain solvent. If that's a test for what Labour might do in government, I think it's a pretty good reason to follow the Chancellor and our present Prime Minister and re-elect us so we can go on trying to bring up the levels of productivity, bring up the levels of growth, bring up the reform and development of public services by getting more people into work, higher tax revenues and preferably lower rates of tax themselves. The Chancellor has announced changes to the penalties on child benefit. I go back far enough to remember when most of the value of child benefit came in the value of the child tax allowance. Children can't work. If I had a dependent pensioner in my household, there'd be an income coming with them. For any family who has a child under working age, they ought to be able to get the kind of support so over a family life cycle you receive support when you need it and you pay back when you're more dependent or able to work. And I hope we can move to a stage where the whole of that child benefit penalty goes completely. There's no philosophical justification, there's no economic justification. It was an error, and I hope I voted against it when it came in. I probably did, you know. I'm that sort of person. There are many other things on the environmental side, which I won't go into because of the limitations on time. I hope that the proposed district heating scheme, which the government wants to have as one of their flagship projects supported by the local authority, can go ahead. There's a problem now with the cost of lane rental and putting hot pipes under our roads. But I think we do need to give serious attention to how we get the major investment so that nearly all our homes come off burning hydrocarbons, whether it's gas or the like, and get onto solar heating or heat pumps, either air or ground source heating. That's going to require a major effort, especially for residential leasehold properties. And my concluding point is the Chancellor announced more money for more free schools. I hope one of them will be the SEND school proposed in Worthing, in the new Durrington estate. Nearly 1 child in 5 in West Sussex has some kind of a statement. They deserve specialist support. It's good for them and it's good for the other children. And I hope we'll get an announcement on that very soon. Having said that, I welcome the government's plans. I think those who say that they will take us back to square one are exactly right.
Dame Angela Eagle.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this was a budget entirely focused on the electoral prospects of the Conservative Party, not the needs of the country or our people. And so the Chancellor decided his only chance to get them through that election was to trumpet so-called tax cuts. But the tax burden is actually going up. And he's made an incredible series of assumptions about departmental spending up to 5 years in the future, and then blown all the money that he saved from making those assumptions on pre-election giveaways. It was obvious from the moment that the Chancellor sat down last November that this early budget would contain more so-called cuts to personal taxes, albeit against a background of rising taxes, as the OBR confirms at paragraph 1.21, page 12 of its report. Taxes will rise as a percentage of GDP all the way up to 2028-29. Now, the Chancellor said as much that he was seeking tax cuts before the OBR had even produced its current forecasts. He said it before the UK's economic situation had deteriorated, landing our economy in a technical recession, wiping out his expected fiscal headroom. And he hinted at tax cuts before it emerged that our economy is now smaller than it was when the Prime Minister first walked into Downing Street. So in recent days we've observed the Chancellor and Prime Minister engaged in an edifying, increasingly frantic search for tax rises and future spending cuts to top up the kitty for personal tax giveaways. And they've come up with a vape tax, changes to non-dom status, which were proposed by Labour and long ridiculed by the Chancellor himself. And perhaps the Minister, when he replies, will indicate whether those that no longer pay non-dom, no longer have non-dom tax status, will actually pay inheritance tax. And we've also had changes to the tax treatment of the holiday let regime. So, whilst the party opposite cheered the tax cut sleight of hand, let's bear in mind some facts. Despite all the Chancellor's smoke and mirrors, the tax burden at the end of this Parliament will be higher than it has been since the Second World War. Yet our public services are crumbling around us, with 1 in 10 local authorities on the verge of bankruptcy, and our infrastructure and public realm falling apart. And the cost of living crisis persists, with the UK's real wage growth the slowest than it has been since the Napoleonic Wars. No wonder we have a flatlining economy, because the freeze to income tax and national insurance thresholds is due to raise $44 billion in the next 5 years, as millions of people are dragged into higher rate tax. The personal tax cuts the Chancellor is brandishing today are, in other words, completely drowned out by these other huge increases in tax, and the Chancellor and his predecessor have announced even more. The Chancellor's claimed it's his moral duty to cut taxes, but in reality he's put them up, and he just hopes nobody will notice. But, Madam, I'm happy to give
I think he's making a powerful case for the need for investment in public services, but in that context I do wonder why the Labour Party appears to be supporting the freezing of the fuel duty, because we know that the cost of freezing fuel duty since 2010 is now a staggering £90 billion, and climate emissions are also 7% higher than they would have been since 2010 if that policy hadn't been in effect. So precisely because she wants to see more money going into public services, can she explain why Labour is supporting this extraordinary policy?
Well, I certainly think that the costing of that policy in the scorecard should be more honest, and it should be taken out of the scorecard if it's not going to be put into effect. Taxes are still higher than they've been since the Second World War, and the government has continued to fritter away billions on fraud and waste. Just today we learned that taxpayers have had to pick up the bill for the Science Minister's legal costs and damages in a libel case. How much has that debacle cost us? First, the Conservatives gave us the catastrophic mini-budget with its unfunded tax cuts, which spooked the markets and sent mortgage costs and rents soaring for millions. Now, the current Chancellor has decided to fund his election giveaways with the fiscal fiction of huge cuts in planned departmental spending, scheduled to last for the whole of the next Parliament. There are no detailed plans on how these cuts in spending can be safely delivered, because we won't have a spending review, and today the Chancellor confirmed that there will not be a spending review until after the next general election. He's pencilled in a so-called increase of nearly 1% for departmental budget spending, but he's not compensated for higher than expected inflation, population growth or any extra cost pressures.
Would my old friend give way?
I'm happy to.
My old friend would give way. It's not just flatlining in terms of 1%, but if she looks at capital on page 27 of the Red Book, that most departments are actually either staying still or in some cases actually, like the Home Office, Education and Defence, actually have been by 2024-25 having their budgets cut.
And my right honourable friend must be able to read my mind, because that was exactly the point that I was coming on to make in real terms, up to 18% cuts in unprotected departments, going all the way through to the end of the next Parliament, which have been described by David Gauke, the ex-Tory Treasury Minister, as the height of fiscal irresponsibility. So the legacy of this government is a burgeoning government debt, up from 64.7% of GDP when Labour left office in 2010 to 95% now. The Chancellor will just barely meet his own self-imposed fiscal rules by the tiniest of margins. Meanwhile, his neglect means that NHS waiting lists have soared, with 7.8 million treatments outstanding, and despite publishing 11 plans for growth since 2010, the trend growth rate is down from 2.3% in the 2000s to 0.8% this year. There's no regional plan, no working industrial strategy, no sign of levelling up, as regional disparities are widening, not closing. And our GDP is now 400 billion less than expected from the growth rate forecast by the OBR in 2010. Wages have stagnated. The government have also delivered deepening levels of poverty caused by low wages and real-term benefit cuts, which have reduced the incomes of the poorest 20% and seen the number of people relying on food banks go from 60,000 to nearly 3 million. So we've seen the last desperate throw of the dice from a failing, discredited government, which has long since run out of ideas and is finally running out of road.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've declared my business interests in the Register. I'm pleased the Chancellor started by reminding the nation that under Conservative leadership, governments since 2010 have presided over the creation of 800 new jobs every day, every week, every month, every year, and have halved unemployment. The scourge of worklessness, which was inherited, has been banished, and we now have the less worrying problem that we can't get enough people to fill all the jobs, rather than the other way around, of not having enough jobs for the people. And I'm pleased that he reminded the House that we have outperformed in growth all of the major European nations. But I'm sure he would agree with me that that is a very feeble target to set ourselves, and we are now free to do so much better. And the question we need to ask is, why has the United States of America so outperformed Europe so comprehensively for so long, and what can we learn? And the first thing we can learn from them is a better system of economic policy guidance and control. The requirements on the Federal Reserve Board, their central bank, is a balanced mandate. It is not just the 2% inflation, which is a very necessary target, which we share, but also they are to promote growth and growth in employment, so they understand the trade-offs and can adjust the policy accordingly. And I would like us, as our way of steering the economy, to get rid of fanciful made-up figures for 5 years' time by the OBR, which are always wrong, and to have two main aims: to have that 2% inflation target not merely binding on the bank, but also binding on the whole government, because government has a big impact on prices and wages. And I would want us to have a 2% growth rate, considerably higher growth rate than European countries have been achieving in the last decade, which I think is achievable if we took the right actions. Now, to do that, we need the Bank of England to work in sympathy with the government's policy. And I remind the House that there is a dual mandate on the bond portfolio, the so-called APF, and the Bank of England, having bought far too many bonds ridiculously high prices on very low yields, running a very loose policy which gave us an inflation, has now lurched too far the other way, is running too tight a policy, is selling far too many bonds at much lower prices, prices it deliberately lowered in the market, and saddling us with losses. In this document it confirms that the accumulated losses paid so far, which taxpayers and the Treasury have to pay, amount to £49 billion since the thing flipped over in 2022. 34 billion year to date, the last figure I saw. Unaffordable, unnecessary, quite wrong policy, meaning we have less growth and a far bigger bill. I'm very glad that the government has decided to major on productivity in general, and in particular on public sector productivity. It was some months ago when I stumbled across a figure in ONS figures well concealed, saying that in the 3 years from COVID, we had lost 7.5% productivity in our public services. So I did a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation and said that's roughly 30 billion. It means that it costs £30 billion more today to produce the same level and range of public service as it did before COVID, as well, of course, and many tens of billions more on top of that you actually have to pay because of all the inflation. So it was a 30 billion hit. I now see that the government more or less agrees. The Chancellor has costed the loss in his figures at 6% rather than 7.5%, but he has said that he wants to eliminate a 5% productivity shortfall out of the 6%, and he costs that at 20 billion, which is exactly the same as my 30 billion for 7.5%. So that is felicitous indeed. And so the issue is, how are they going to go about doing this? Now, I hear the scheme for the NHS, that there's going to be a very elaborate expenditure on very wide-ranging centralised computerisation. Good luck with that. But I wouldn't rely just on that myself for my productivity package for the public services. And you don't actually need new investment to get yourselves back to the productivity level you were at in 2019. You don't need to use all today's wonderful AI. You just need to use what you already got, which you had in 2019. And it's about management, it's about personnel, and it's about giving the personnel the right tasks. And what we've seen is a huge increase in managerial positions and administrative positions, and far from managing things better, it's managing it less well. We had a shocking case in the press recently where there were an awful lot of managers presiding over a prison that had gone wrong, and they weren't able to actually do the more important day-by-day things that were needed in order to resolve the problem. If you look at the way in which there's been this huge expansion in the civil service and other public administration in the COVID period, you will see not only has there been a big increase in numbers, but there's also been a big increase in those who have been promoted up the grades for whatever reason. But you do need enough people that somebody is supervising, and you don't need all supervisors because they are often too posh to do the work. So we do need to manage things better, and that is the productivity challenge before us. I would also urge the government to abolish UK government investment. It is a very expensive body that has a completely dreadful track record in that it is presided over the post office and did nothing to deal with the sub-postmasters, and it presided over £1,400 million of accumulated losses, bankrupting the corporation. And then it presides over Network Rail, and the whole rail industry, and Network Rail and HS2 is absorbing £33 billion of public money this year, and I don't think we're getting value for it. So, my time is up. Government, redouble your efforts on productivity. Understand it's mainly about who you hire and what you ask them to do, and get rid of UK GI, and ministers take responsibility for the dreadfully badly performing nationalised industries.
Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What we heard from the Chancellor was a budget that reeks of desperation and deceit, from a government that knows it's lost the trust of the British people. A bottom-of-the-barrel budget, nothing to make families truly better off after the catastrophic fall in living standards we've seen under the Conservatives, and no plan for long-term economic growth, no real extra support for the NHS and our public services, and no end in sight to the years of unfair tax hikes, just a last-ditch attempt from the Conservative Party to cling on to power. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, people have had enough of this government's empty promises. What they want is a general election to get this out-of-touch government out of Downing Street. They are sick and tired of a government that promised in last year's budget to grow the economy, only to plunge it into recession. With a government that promised to bring down NHS waiting lists, only to let them continue up and up, and that promised to cut tax, but instead has hit families with years of unfair stealth tax rises. Never before have I seen a government deliver weaker public services, higher taxes and zero growth all at the same time, and all in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Madam Deputy Speaker, I fear that by designing his economic policy to give a short-term sugar rush to Conservative backbenchers, the Chancellor is condemning millions of families to high mortgage rates for much, much longer. And you don't need to take my word for it. Look at the OBR. The OBR forecasts mortgage rates staying at 4% or more for the next 5 years at least. This is a disaster for homeowners across the United Kingdom. And let's look at taxes. The Chancellor seems desperate to convince people he's letting them keep more of